Hello John, this is the testing of your Soarer 1UZ non-VVTi harness. Obviously been fully rebuilt. Everything is labeled, so it'll be a really nice quick install for you. So starting from the ECU, that all plugs in there. You've got your harness that goes over to your fuse box, your other harness that goes over to your fuse box. The fuse box controls obviously your starter and all your EFI stuff. You've opted for to use the fuel pump ECU. So we've got the 2 wires for the fuel pump ECU coming off the harness here. We've obviously built the harness that goes off to the fuel pump ECU over there. And then you've got your section which goes down to your actual fuel pump, which we've obviously wired into ours just so we can show that it's working. Coming from the harness down here, you've got your grommet going up, splits into a T-piece, goes along this side over here. Obviously all your injectors are across there. Coming down here, you've got your right bank cam sensor, then your left bank cam sensor. Coming down here, then you've obviously got your coil plug. Coming down here, you've got your lambda plug, which is going to stretch across the back of the block there. Now I have left your oil out because you've got the older style system which just uses a spade connector, but I didn't know if you wanted to use that or whether you were actually planning on changing for an oil pressure sensor rather than just a switch. So we've left that blank for you so you can make that decision. And then coming over this side, you've got your actual crank sensor over there. All right. Coming over this side over here, again, same story. So it runs around the back here. Your gearbox section comes off there. So there's all your gearbox stuff over there. All right. And then you've got your sub harness coming off here. So that's the one that goes under the intake. And that's going to come along here. And there's your starter. And there's your 2 knock sensors over there. And the rest comes along here, over here. And then you've got your TPS plug coming off over here. And then coming down here, now I've had to put a coil on here for the testing, but you've got all your bits and bobs like your coolant temp sensor, your twin wire one for the ECU, you've got your single wire one for the gauge. Then you've got your idle air control valve, which will obviously normally be positioned here at the front. So I've got this plugged in so we can actually see this working when we feed the RPM signal to the crank sensor. Just to make sure that's working correctly. Obviously we've got the coils plugged in here with spark plugs so we can make sure both coils are working. You probably saw the one on the other side there already. Then coming down here, you've got your MAF plug. So that's going to plug into your aluminium MAF housing. And then you've got your alternator plug. Now your alternator plug does have the old one. So we have actually made this adapter so that adapts it from the oval one to the round one. Reason we've done that is because it's much easier to get hold of the oval shaped ones than it is the round ones. So if your alternator breaks, you can just remove this and you can fit a newer alternator on, and you've got the correct plug and everything is wired correctly. And then lastly on this side, your other O2 sensor, which again will just run along the block like that to the O2 sensors at the back there. Okay, so I may chop in this video a little bit because obviously we've got various different things to test. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to test the fuel pump relay and the starter circuit kind of in one. So as we explained, the actual Soarer selectors plugs are no longer available from Toyota. So we've swapped this out for a different selector for you with a different plug on. This just bolts onto the box. So you just bolt yours off, bolt this one back on, and away you go. So obviously I've got this set to park so that the starter circuit and everything will work. And I do have a video of how the fuel pump systems work. In your case, you're using the ECU. So that's actually controlling the fuel pump. But it still has the same systems. It doesn't prime. Obviously it only comes on when you're cranking. So when you're cranking, the ECU gets to 12 volts, turn the fuel pump on, and then when the correct RPM signals are fed to the ECU, it'll keep the pump running. Okay, so we'll go through and do that. Then we'll look at the alternator light and the oil light. So that's basically the feeds over to here. So I'll go through in a minute all of these wires here, but essentially I've got these 2 LEDs hooked up for oil and alternator. So when I earth them out, these little LEDs will light up and we'll go through that. All right. Then we're going to feed the engine signal from the crank and the cam. Then we're going to be able to test all the injectors one by one. We're going to check that the coils are working. We're going to check the idle air control valve is working. And then finally, I've got a little dash set up here so we can check the check engine light, the feed that comes out here, and the tacho signal to make sure that's working as it should do. And then lastly, we'll go through all the trouble codes and how to read them, and in your welcome pack you'll get a whole list of all the codes so you can diagnose what your issues are. So inside the fuse box here is an LED to do the check engine light. We do give it to you so you can put it into your car, but we always put it inside the fuse box just in case you need to diagnose codes and you haven't yet wired up all of that. So that's the reason why it's in there as well. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do to start off and get it out of the way is I'm going to do the alternator light and the oil light just so you can see those. Okay, so obviously I've got the LEDs hooked up to 12 volts. Remember, these are earth signals, so they're giving out an earth when it comes in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab the oil wire and I'm going to earth it out. And you can see the LED lights up there. So I'm happy that the oil light is correct. Get that there. Right, so oh, that wire dropped out. Let's just quickly put that in there. Okay, so I'm just going to earth out the alternator light and you should see LED come on. Right, so I'm happy with that. I'm happy with all of those signals over there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put the ignition, well actually before I do that, apologies, let me go through all these wires over here. So they are all color coded to individual ones. This is what you'll get in your welcome pack, but I'm just going to go through them one by one with you now. But again, this you will have to wire everything up. So starting from the top here, you're going to get these ones, blue with a red tracer. Those are permanent 12 volts, not ignition 12 volts, permanent 12 volts. So you must wire those up. The reason it needs permanent 12 volts is to keep codes. It's going to be a nightmare to try and diagnose issues if you have these connected to ignition, because every time you turn the ignition off, the ECU will reset and it'll clear all the codes. It's very difficult to diagnose when that happens. And the major ones are, you've got your black with a red. All right, so that's ignition 12 volts. That's the one you're going to feed 12 volts on ignition. Just make sure it's not like an accessory feed, so i.e. it cuts power when it actually goes into cranking if you're using an ignition barrel. Then you've got your black with the yellow. That's your start signal, so that requires a 12 volts. Again, that can be taken from your key barrel. Okay, and then moving along, so let's see, we've got yellow with a black. That's oil pressure, so that comes straight from the harness. You've got pink with a blue. That's your alternator light, so again, take that to your dash. You've got white with a blue, that's brake switch, so that requires 12 volts when you press your brakes. Then you've got yellow with a red, that is your check engine light, so that one again for the dash, if you do a little LED or whatever, and you'll see that's hooked up to the clocks here. Then you've got your yellow, which is your tacho feed, so that's the one you're going to feed to a tachometer to go from there. You've got your yellow with a green, and that's connected to that single wire temperature sensor that you can use to power a gauge on your dash. And then we've got the gray, which is actually the overdrive off. I do explain it in the welcome pack, but basically if you provide this with ground, it'll turn overdrive off, which will effectively keep the gearbox only going 1, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's all for that one over there, and that's sort of the major ones to get it running. We do have the second plug over here, and this is for the gearbox side of things. So I'm just going to go through that with you over there. So you've got a black with a red, which is park. So again, these are basically for like lights on a dash. So they're going to provide 12 volts when the actual selector is in, you know, park, reverse, neutral, drive, etc. So black with a red is park. Red with a blue is reverse. So for your reverse lights, red and a yellow is neutral. Blue and red is drive. White and blue is 2. Orange is low. Then we got the ones that you can connect up with. Red is your kick down switch, so that you need to supply ground via a kick down switch. Okay, yellow is what I call PWR mode, so this might be on your shifter if you've got the original shifter. So this needs to be supplied at 12 volts via a switch, and that'll put the transmission into power mode, if you will. Then I've got black yellow, which is speed signal. So this is the speed signal coming from the actual 3-wire Hall effect speed sensor at the back of your gearbox. We've taken care of the power and the ground inside the harness itself, so we just feed the signal out to you so you can use that for that. Okay, so those are pretty much all the wires explained. Don't worry about remembering it all. Obviously it's going to be in your welcome pack along with all the diagnostic codes. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to fire it up so you can see all I'm basically doing is supplying the black with the red with 12 volts. So just bear with me while I do that. Stay in. Right, so you can see now we've got the LED lit up telling us the ECU is alive. We've also got the check engine light over here. Okay, So next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and see if I can get the camera to show it. But obviously I've got the selector in park, okay? Now as I hit the starter on this one over here, you're going to see the fuel pump running. So I'm going to move the camera over to the fuel pump and you'll actually see the fuel coming out of the filter there. So let me just make sure. Oh, there, it's making a mess. Right, okay. So as I press the starter, oh, you can see the pump is working there. So happy with that, happy with the fuel pump, happy with the starter circuit. So all I'm going to do now, is I'm just going to make sure that your actual starter solenoid plug is getting 12 volts. So I'm just going to use my multimeter here. Right. So let's give that a ground. Make sure we're on voltage DC. Okay. And I'm gonna, there's your starter plug over there. Now, we fit these starter plugs because that's the newer style one. If you have the older style one, you can remove this connector. The terminal inside is exactly the same as the old style one. Just put a little bit of heat shrink over and push it on. Keep the plug. If you ever need to replace your starter, you can replace it with a newer style one that has these plugs on. More than likely easier to get hold of than the very older ones, especially in your case with the Soarer as it's an import motor. Okay, I'm just going to disconnect the fuel pump quickly because otherwise it's going to spray water everywhere. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so when I touch, there you go. You can also hear the starter relay clicking, so obviously it is controlled there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move this gear selector out just so you can see. There you go, I've just clicked it all the way to the other side. So now, if I try and start it, nothing. Okay, so that's just to show you that the park neutral switch is as it is correct. So again, there you go. As soon as I move it into park or neutral, we're A for away. Okay, so happy with the starter circuit, happy with the fuel pump circuit. We've done the alternator light, we've done the oil light. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to actually feeding the engine RPM signal. When I do that, you're going to hear the coils go crazy, the injectors go crazy. And also what I want you to notice is this idle control valve. What's going to basically happen is once this is sort of open, as the piston's actually pulled in, so it would allow air to bypass it. So as soon as I give it the RPM signal, well, you're going to see this thing's going to shoot out. And that obviously is closing it because the RPM we're giving it is over 1,000 RPM. So it figures that it doesn't need to idle anymore. So it makes it fully open. So if you give me a second. So I'm just going to put the camera down for a second while I do that. Just bear with me. Okay, so hopefully you can hear these coils going crazy. So there you go, we got spark on that side. We've got spark on that side. And as I said, if you look at that now, you see that piston is shot all the way up. So you're happy that the idle air control valve is working. So now I'm going to go around all the injectors. So starting from this side, obviously injector 1. You can hear that clicking away. Injector 3. Yeah, that clicking away. Injector 5. Yeah, that clicking away. Injector 7. Yeah, that clicking away. And we'll come over to this side. We've got injector 2. Yeah, that clicking away. Injector 4. Yeah, that clicking away. Injector 6. Yeah, that clicking away. And injector 8. Can you hear that clicking away? Okay, so we're happy. All the injectors are working as they should. All the coils are working as they should. Idle control valve is working as it should. And if I come over to the cluster, you'll see we're actually getting an RPM signal out of there. Okay, so check engine light is on because obviously we don't have a MAF plugged in, which is good because now we're going to be able to get and look at the trouble codes. So first thing I'm going to do, and you'll see that idle control valve now is actually returned to the open position, ready for the next start. Okay, so to read the trouble codes, again, this is in the welcome pack, but in the fuse box here, you'll see there's an open slot. that is not for, it doesn't need a fuse. It's basically to bridge TE1 and earth so that we can read the codes. So in your fuse box, you've got a little fuse puller over there. You could take either one of these. One is STA and one is brake switch. Take that out. Now, as I touch it here, you're going to see the light's going to go off and it's going to start reading through the codes. I'm just going to read through the codes with you, just so you can see how to read them. They always come in groups of 2, so you always take the first number and the second number and bunch them together. So I'll put it down now and we'll start counting the codes. 1, 1, 2, 3. That's because the cam and crank signals are wrong. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 24, inlet air temp for MAF. 1, 2, 3. 1, that's 31 for the MAF. And you see now we get a long pause and then it goes back and it goes 1, 1, 2, 3, and then it'll do it again. So you got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and if I pull that out, light will go off and then it'll come back on solid again. Okay, so that's how you read codes, and you can clearly see what it does is there's shorter pauses and at the end is a very long pause, and then it'll start all over again. Okay, what I normally do when reading trouble codes is if you have a problem, remember this check engine light shouldn't be on when it's running, so if it does come on there is an issue. What I do is I don't just disconnect the battery to reset it. First thing you do is read the codes. It will store all the codes, so do it first of all, run through everything, write all the codes down. Then you just have to disconnect the power from the fuse box or whatever. The second you disconnect it, it resets it. You don't have to hold it off for 10-15 minutes or whatever like that. The second you pull it out, resets, plug it back in again, start it up 2 times, and then read the codes again and see what comes back. Okay, so that's basically that. There will be 2 pages of your welcome pack that's going to detail all of the actual trouble codes, what they mean. So that's going to be fine. And then last thing I forgot is outside the grommet here. Sorry, it's a nice warm day today. Got shorts on. Right, so there's your grommet, and out of there comes your igniter plug. So these are designed to sort of just go on the firewall. Now these need to be earthed. If they're not earthed, you're not going to do anything. All right, so just make sure they are earthed really, really well. That's why I normally bring them out here, so you can bolt them straight to the firewall, straight to the chassis. That gives you a really good earth for that. All right, and everything else is really, really nice and straightforward and simple. Just plugs in. Obviously, we've got rid of a lot of the excess stuff you don't need. So whatever's left over, once you plug all this in, you can just get rid of all of that. Okay, but that's about it really. So we're just going to include all the pictures of the build and the completed harness now after the video. So if you want to see that, hang around for that. But I'm happy with everything here. So next thing is get this into a box and get it on its way to you, and hopefully it's a really, really straightforward fitment. And as discussed, we've made the wires to the fuel pump ECU. We made it 2 meters long, so it should be plenty long enough to reach from where you are. And oh, sorry, the fuel pump gets its power from ECU, gets its power from the fuse box. So you'll see the little harness we've made splits into 2. This one is going to be in here permanently. It just stays in there, and then these 2 are just literally a plug that hangs off the harness and you just plug in from there. All right, but that's it. That's everything tested and I'm happy. So we'll get in the box and off to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.